The elevator doors opened onto the 42nd floor, and Natalie Lewis walked straight into what looked like a corporate anniversary party in full swing. She'd been warned there would be an event when she agreed to this last-minute photo shoot, but the email hadn't mentioned it would be this crowded or this elegant. "You must be the photographer," said a woman in a sharp burgundy suit, appearing at her side with a tablet. "I'm Grace, VP of Communications. We're so grateful you could fill in on such short notice." Natalie adjusted the camera bag on her shoulder and smiled. "Happy to help. Your regular photographer's studio flooded, right? Completely destroyed. Poor Marcus is dealing with insurance claims instead of being here for our biggest night of the year." Grace gestured toward the crowd of well-dressed executives mingling beneath crystal chandeliers. 20 years of Ashford Industries. The CEO wanted everything documented perfectly, especially since we're unveiling this year's annual report tonight. Annual report. Natalie had photographed weddings, corporate headshots, even a few magazine spreads, but she'd never shot an annual report unveiling. It's tradition here. Sebastian Ashford personally designs each year's report with our marketing team. They're part coffee table book, part financial document. Collectors actually buy the older ones. Grace's eyes sparkled with genuine pride. This year's theme is the heart of manufacturing. Lots of candid shots from our facilities, real people doing real work. Very different from the corporate sterility most companies go for. Natalie followed Grace through the crowd, catching glimpses of floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the Manhattan skyline at dusk. Ashford Industries manufactured sustainable building materials. She'd learned from a quick internet search on the subway ride over. They'd grown from a small family operation to a multinational corporation worth billions, all while maintaining a reputation for treating workers fairly and investing in environmental innovation. "There he is," Grace said, nodding toward a group of men in tailored suits near the bar. "Sebastian Ashford himself. He'll want to meet you before we start." Natalie's breath caught as she looked at the man Grace indicated. He stood a head taller than most people around him, with dark hair that held just a hint of silver at the temples, despite him looking no older than his early 30s. His suit was impeccable but somehow didn't look stuffy on him, maybe because of the way he stood with his jacket unbuttoned, one hand casually in his pocket while he listened intently to whoever was speaking. When he laughed at something, the sound carried across the room, warm and genuine. "Mr. Ashford," Grace called as they approached. "This is Natalie Lewis, our photographer for the evening." Sebastian turned, and Natalie found herself looking into eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the ocean. His handshake was firm, his smile reaching those eyes in a way that made her pulse quicken. "Miss Lewis, thank you for saving us on such short notice. Grace mentioned you dropped everything to be here." His voice had a slight roughness to it, like he'd spent the day talking too much and was pushing through anyway. "It's Natalie, please, and it was no trouble. I had the evening free." She wasn't going to mention she'd actually had a date planned that she'd canceled, or that her best friend had called her crazy for ditching a promising hinge match for a last-minute work gig. "Well, we're lucky for that." He gestured toward the room. "I'm hoping you can capture the energy tonight. This company has always been about people first, and I want the photos to reflect that. Not stiff corporate poses, but real moments." "That's my specialty," Natalie said, feeling herself relax. Some clients wanted everything posed and perfect, which always made for boring photos. "I'll make myself invisible and catch everything as it happens." Sebastian's smile widened. "Perfect. Though I should warn you, we do have one staged moment planned. The annual report unveiling itself. Can't really capture that candidly when it's the whole point of the evening. I can work with that. Excellent. He glanced at his watch. We're starting in about 30 minutes. Grace will show you around, point out the key people you should focus on. Board members, senior executives, a few major clients who flew in for this. He paused, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary. And if you need anything at all, just find me. As Grace led her away, Natalie felt the warmth of his attention lingering on her skin. She shook it off and focused on the job. This was work, nothing more. It didn't matter that Sebastian Ashford was probably the most attractive man she'd ever met in person, or that his handshake had sent electricity up her arm, or that she'd caught him watching her as she walked away. She spent the next 20 minutes moving through the crowd, introducing herself and getting a feel for the space. The venue was spectacular, all polished marble and warm lighting, with the annual reports displayed on easels throughout the room. She paused to flip through one from 3 years ago, impressed by the quality of the photography and design. Each page balanced financial data with stunning images of workers, factories, and the products they created. Beautiful, aren't they? Natalie turned to find an older man with silver hair and kind eyes standing beside her. His name tag read Richard Ashford, Chairman. They really are, she said honestly. I've never seen corporate reports that looked like this. That's all Sebastian's vision. When he took over as CEO 6 years ago, everyone thought he was too young, too idealistic. But he insisted the company's story needed to be told through the people who made it possible. Richard's expression softened with paternal pride. He spent the first year visiting every facility we had, talking to workers on the floor, understanding the business from the ground up. These reports are his love letter to them. You're his father. I am. Started this company 40 years ago in a garage with nothing but a dream and a lot of stubbornness. Sebastian's taken it further than I ever imagined. He gestured toward where Sebastian stood, now surrounded by a new group of people, all of them seeming to lean toward him as he spoke. He lives and breathes this place. Sometimes I wish he'd take more time for himself, find someone to share his life with, but he says the company is his priority right now. Natalie nodded, not sure what to say. It wasn't uncommon for successful people to sacrifice personal relationships for their careers, though something about that felt sad when applied to someone who seemed as genuinely warm as Sebastian appeared to be. Well, I should let you get to work, Richard said. But I wanted to introduce myself and tell you how much we appreciate you being here tonight. The unveiling ceremony began precisely at 8 o'clock. Sebastian took the stage with an ease that spoke of someone comfortable with public speaking. Though Natalie noticed, he kept his hands relaxed at his sides rather than gripping the podium. She'd photographed enough nervous speakers to recognize someone who taught himself to appear calm. 20 years ago, my father had a vision, Sebastian began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. He wanted to build things that mattered, that would last, that would make the world a little bit better. He wanted to do it in a way that honored the people doing the work, not just the bottom line. Natalie moved quietly around the edge of the crowd, her camera capturing the rapt attention on people's faces. This was what she loved about photography, finding the human moments in formal events, the genuine emotions beneath the polished surfaces. This year's annual report is called The Heart of Manufacturing, Sebastian continued, because that's what we are. Not just machines and materials, but people with heart. People who care about their craft, who take pride in their work, who show up every day and give their best. He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him filled with the cover of the annual report. The image showed a woman's hands, rough and scarred with work, carefully positioning a piece of sustainable composite material. The lighting was dramatic, almost reverent, turning manual labor into art. Over the past year, our photographers spent hundreds of hours in our facilities, capturing the real story of what we do. I want to show you some of my favorite images from this year's report. The presentation that followed was stunning. Each photograph told a story. Workers collaborating over blueprints, machinery in motion, finished products being loaded onto trucks. But it was the portraits that really struck Natalie. Faces weathered by years of work, young people learning from experienced mentors, the pride in someone's eyes as they examined their finished product. And then a particular image flashed on the screen, and Natalie's heart stopped. It was her. She stood in what looked like one of the company's warehouses, though she had no memory of ever being in such a place. The photo showed her in profile, looking down at something in her hands with an expression of gentle concentration. She wore a denim jacket she definitely owned, her hair pulled back in the messy bun she favored when she was working. The lighting made her look luminous, like she belonged in that industrial space, like she was part of the machinery of creation itself. But she had never posed for this photo. She had never been in an Ashford Industries facility. She had no idea how her image ended up in their annual report. Her hands shook as she lowered her camera. Around her, the presentation continued, but she couldn't focus. Her mind raced through possibilities. Was it a case of mistaken identity? Did she have a doppelganger who worked for Ashford Industries? But no, that was definitely her jacket, and the small star-shaped birthmark on her wrist was visible in the image. The presentation ended to enthusiastic applause. Natalie barely registered it. She needed to see that photo again, needed to understand what was happening. She pushed through the crowd toward the displayed reports, frantically flipping through the current year's edition until she found the image on page 47. There she was again, frozen in glossy print. The caption read, "Natalie, Quality Assurance Specialist, Building Materials Division, photographed at our Brooklyn facility." But she wasn't a quality assurance specialist. She'd never worked in building materials. The Brooklyn facility was less than 5 miles from her apartment, but she'd never set foot inside it. That's one of my favorites. Sebastian's voice came from directly behind her, and Natalie jumped. She turned to find him standing close, looking down at the same page with a soft smile. "You captured something special there," she said carefully, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "The subject seems very natural. Our photographer spent weeks in that facility. He said some people just have a quality about them that the camera loves." This woman, Natalie, she was apparently so focused on her work that she forgot he was there. That's the kind of authenticity we wanted. He looked up from the report to her face. "Are you all right? You look pale." This was insane. She was standing next to the CEO of a billion-dollar company, staring at a photo of herself that shouldn't exist, while he praised the photographer who'd somehow captured it. She should say something. She should tell him about the mistake. But what if it wasn't a mistake? What if there was something stranger happening here? What if admitting she was the woman in the photo caused problems for the company, for their annual report, for Sebastian himself on this important night? "I'm fine," she managed. "Just a bit warm in here." His expression shifted to concern. "Let me get you some water. Come on, there's a terrace this way." Before she could protest, his hand was on her lower back, gently guiding her through the crowd toward a set of glass doors. The touch was professional, courteous, but it still sent warmth spreading through her body. She let him lead her outside into the cool February air, the sounds of the party muting behind them. The terrace wrapped around the building, offering a breathtaking view of the city lights. Sebastian guided her to a bench and disappeared back inside, returning moments later with 2 bottles of water. "Thank you," Natalie said, accepting one and taking a long drink. The cold water helped clear her head. She needed to think rationally. "This is beautiful. It's my favorite part of this venue. Sometimes during events I sneak out here just to breathe." He sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them but angling his body toward hers. "The crowds can be overwhelming. You seemed comfortable in there. Natural speaker." "Years of practice. My father insisted I learn public speaking when I was 16. He said if I was going to run this company someday, I needed to be able to talk to people without wanting to hide." Sebastian smiled. "I hated it at first, but he was right. It's an essential skill." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the city humming below them. Natalie knew she should go back inside, continue doing her job, but something kept her rooted to the spot. She wanted to understand the mystery of the photograph, yes, but more than that, she wanted to stay in this quiet moment with Sebastian, away from the chaos of the party. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course. The photos in your annual report, how long ago were they taken?" Sebastian considered this. "It varies. We collect images throughout the year." "Why?" "Just curious about the process. The one we were just looking at, the woman in the Brooklyn facility, do you know when that was shot?" "I'd have to check with our photographer, but I think that series was done last spring. April or May, maybe." He looked at her curiously. "Does it matter?" "Last spring." Natalie had lived in her current apartment for 3 years, worked as a freelance photographer for 5. She tried to remember what she'd been doing in April and May of last year. Wedding season was starting, so she'd been busy. She'd also taken some commercial headshot gigs to pay the bills between bigger jobs, but she definitely hadn't been working in a building materials warehouse. "No, it doesn't matter," she lied. "Just interested in the timeline of putting something like this together. It's a year-long process, minimum. We start planning the next report almost as soon as the current one is unveiled. Theme development, photographer selection, facility schedules, then the actual shoots, editing, design, printing." He stretched his legs out in front of him, and Natalie noticed how the motion made his suit jacket pull across his shoulders. "I probably spend more time on these reports than I should. My board thinks I'm crazy for being so involved in what's essentially marketing material. But it's more than marketing to you." "Yes." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "These people, the ones we photograph, they're the reason this company exists. They deserve to be celebrated, to have their stories told beautifully. If I can give them that, then the time I spend is worthwhile." Natalie felt something shift in her chest. She'd met plenty of wealthy, powerful people through her work. Most of them talked a good game about caring for their employees, but few seemed to genuinely mean it. Sebastian, though, there was a sincerity in his voice that felt real. "You really love what you do," she said softly. "I do, though sometimes I wonder if I love it too much." He leaned back against the bench, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "My father mentioned tonight that I work too hard. He's not wrong. I can't remember the last time I did something just for fun, or the last real conversation I had that wasn't about quarterly earnings or supply chain logistics. And yet here you are, having a real conversation with your photographer on a terrace instead of networking inside." Sebastian laughed, that same warm sound she'd heard earlier. "Here I am. Though to be fair, I'm supposed to be checking that you're all right. That's practically networking." "I'm fine now, the water helped." She stood, suddenly aware that she'd been neglecting her job. "I should get back to work. There are probably 100 moments I'm missing." "Wait." He stood closer than he needed to be. "Before we go back, can I say something?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Sure." I'm glad Marcus's studio flooded, not for his sake, obviously, that's terrible for him, but I'm glad it brought you here tonight. He ran a hand through his hair, looking almost nervous. That probably sounds strange. We only met an hour ago. It doesn't sound strange, Natalie said, and she meant it. Because despite the confusion about the photograph, despite this whole evening being surreal, she was glad to be here too. Glad to be standing on this terrace with this man who looked at her like she was something precious. But I really should get back to work before Grace sends a search party. They returned to the party, and Natalie threw herself into photographing everything she could. She captured speeches and toasts, candid moments of laughter, the careful choreography of corporate celebration. But she was always aware of where Sebastian stood, who he talked to, how he moved through the room with an easy confidence that drew people to him. And she caught him watching her too. Their eyes would meet across the room and he'd smile, small and private, just for her. It felt like a secret they were keeping, this thread of connection between them in a room full of people who had no idea it existed. The party wound down around 11. Natalie's feet ached from standing, and her camera felt heavy in her hands, but she'd gotten good shots. She could feel it. Grace approached as she was packing up her gear, looking pleased. Sebastian said you were wonderful. He wants to see the photos as soon as you have them ready. Grace handed her a business card. Email me when they're processed and we'll set up a review meeting. I'm thinking we might want to hire you for more events going forward. That would be great, Natalie said, pocketing the card. She wanted to ask more questions about the annual report photos, about the mysterious image of herself, but this didn't seem like the right time or person. Oh, and Sebastian asked me to give you this. Grace handed her an envelope, her expression carefully neutral in a way that suggested she knew exactly what was inside and found it interesting. Natalie waited until she was alone in the elevator to open it. Inside was a check for her photography services, significantly more than her usual rate, and a handwritten note on thick cardstock embossed with the Ashford Industries logo. Natalie, thank you for making tonight special. I meant what I said on the terrace. I'm glad you were here. If you'd like to continue the conversation we started, away from work obligations, I'd love to take you to dinner. My personal number is below. No pressure. Sebastian. She read the note 3 times, her thumb tracing over his handwriting. The penmanship was confident, slightly rushed, like he'd written it quickly before he could second-guess himself. The phone number at the bottom seemed to glow on the page. This was crazy. She'd met him hours ago. He was a billionaire CEO, and she was a freelance photographer who sometimes had to choose between paying rent on time or buying new equipment. They existed in completely different worlds. And there was still the unexplained matter of her appearing in his annual report, which she definitely needed to bring up at some point. But as she stepped out into the February cold and hailed a taxi, Natalie was already imagining what she'd wear to dinner with Sebastian Ashford. She waited 2 days before texting him, not wanting to seem too eager even though she'd composed and deleted approximately 50 messages in the hours after getting home from the party. In the end, she kept it simple. Hi, Sebastian. This is Natalie Lewis. I'd love to have dinner with you. When works for you. His response came within minutes. Friday night. I know a place in Brooklyn, quiet and unpretentious, nothing like the corporate circus the other night. They made plans for 7 o'clock, and Natalie spent the intervening days in a state of nervous anticipation. She processed the photos from the anniversary party and sent them to Grace, who responded with enthusiastic praise. She also spent an embarrassing amount of time looking through the annual report, studying the photo of herself, and trying to understand how it could exist. She even went so far as to call Marcus, the photographer who'd taken the images, on the pretense of introducing herself as his replacement for the party. He was friendly and helpful, talking her through Ashford Industries' preferences and Sebastian's hands-on involvement in selecting images. "The Brooklyn facility shots were some of my best work," Marcus told her proudly. "Especially that portrait of Natalie in quality assurance. She had such a natural presence. Didn't even realize I was photographing her half the time." "You remember much about her?" Natalie asked, her voice carefully casual. "Not particularly. I shot dozens of employees over several days. They all kind of blend together, you know. But the camera loved her." He paused. "Why do you ask?" "Just admiring the work. The composition is beautiful." She hung up more confused than ever. Marcus genuinely believed he'd photographed a woman named Natalie at the Brooklyn facility, but Natalie knew with absolute certainty that she'd never been there. So how had her face ended up in his photographs? By Friday evening, she'd convinced herself she was losing her mind. Maybe it wasn't her in the photo. Maybe it was someone who looked remarkably similar, and the birthmark was just a coincidence. Maybe stress and too much coffee were making her see connections that didn't exist. She dressed carefully for dinner, choosing a dark green dress that made her hazel eyes look more green than brown, and low heels comfortable enough to walk in if needed. She wore her hair down, something she rarely did, letting it fall in waves past her shoulders. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like someone who went on dates with billionaire CEOs. Sebastian picked her up at her apartment, which surprised her. She'd expected a car service or to meet him at the restaurant, but he arrived at her door at precisely 7 o'clock, wearing dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made him look younger, more relaxed. "Hi," he said, and she could swear he looked nervous. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." "You look nice, too." Nice was an understatement. He looked incredible, but she wasn't going to say that. The restaurant was a small Italian place in Carroll Gardens, the kind of neighborhood spot with mismatched chairs and wine bottles lining the walls. Nothing fancy, but the smells coming from the kitchen were intoxicating, and the owner greeted Sebastian with a warm hug. "Seb, it's been too long, and you brought someone special, I see." The owner, a woman in her 60s with flour on her apron, beamed at Natalie. "I'm Maria. Any friend of Seb's is family here." They were led to a corner table with a candle already lit, and Maria winked before disappearing into the kitchen. Sebastian held Natalie's chair for her, a gesture that might have seemed old-fashioned but instead felt natural, courteous. "Come here often?" Natalie asked with a smile. "When I can. Maria's family has owned this place for 40 years. Her husband Antonio does magic in the kitchen." Sebastian poured them each water from the carafe on the table. "I discovered it when I was in college. I'd come here to study, and Maria would feed me whether I ordered anything or not. Said I looked too skinny." "Did you grow up in Brooklyn?" "Queens, actually. Astoria. My father's factory was there originally, just a small operation. We lived in the apartment above it until I was 12. He leaned back in his chair, seeming to relax into the comfortable atmosphere of the restaurant. "What about you? Are you from New York?" "Boston originally. Came here for school and never left. That was 7 years ago." They ordered food based on Sebastian's recommendations, and the conversation flowed easily. He asked about her photography, seeming genuinely interested in her career path and creative process. She asked about his journey to CEO, learning that he'd actually studied engineering before business, that he still liked to spend time on the factory floor understanding how things were made. "My board thinks I'm too hands-on," he admitted, twirling pasta on his fork. "But I can't run a manufacturing company from a boardroom. I need to understand the work, the challenges, the people doing it. That's why the annual reports matter so much to you." "Exactly." They're my way of showing everyone, inside and outside the company, what I see when I visit our facilities. The dignity in the work, the skill, the pride. His eyes lit up as he talked, passionate and animated. Most people look at manufacturing and see it as low-skilled, blue-collar work that doesn't deserve respect. But it's art. It's craftsmanship. It's people using their hands and minds to create things that will outlast them. Natalie found herself leaning forward, caught up in his enthusiasm. She understood that feeling, the desire to capture and honor something people might otherwise overlook. It was why she loved photography. "Can I ask you something that might be weird?" she said, emboldened by good wine and better company. "Please." "The photo in your annual report, the one of the woman named Natalie in Brooklyn. Why did you choose that one specifically?" Sebastian set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. There was something about her face, a quality of attention, of being fully present in the moment. Most people don't look like that when they work. They're distracted, thinking about other things, just going through the motions. But she looked completely absorbed, like what she was doing mattered to her. He paused. "And if I'm being completely honest, she reminded me of you. When I saw that photo months ago during the selection process, something about her struck me. And then you walked into the party on Tuesday and I realized why. You have the same quality. That same presence." Natalie's heart raced. This was her opening. She should tell him the truth, that the woman in the photo didn't just resemble her but was her, somehow impossibly her. But the words stuck in her throat. The evening was going so well. Sebastian was looking at her with such warmth, such genuine interest. She didn't want to ruin it with confusion and questions neither of them could answer. "That's a beautiful thing to say," she said instead. "It's the truth." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "I know this is fast, we barely know each other. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since Tuesday night. When you stood on that terrace with me, it felt like the first real moment I'd had in months, maybe years. I know what you mean." She turned her hand over, letting their fingers intertwine. "I almost didn't take that job. I had other plans that night, but something told me to say yes. I'm glad you did." His thumb traced patterns on her palm and she felt the touch everywhere. "Can I ask you something now?" "Sure." "Why photography? What made you want to do this for a living?" Natalie considered the question. Most people asked about her work but never dug deeper into the why of it. "I like capturing moments that people might otherwise forget. The space between posed and candid, when someone's guard is down and their real self shows through. Those are the images that matter, the ones that will mean something 20 years from now." She smiled. "And I like working for myself, making my own schedule, choosing my own projects. The uncertainty of freelance life is scary sometimes, but it's worth it for the freedom. That takes courage. Most people choose the stable path, the guaranteed paycheck," says the man who runs a billion-dollar company. "That's different. I inherited responsibility. You chose freedom." There was admiration in his voice and something else. Longing, maybe. "I wonder sometimes what my life would be like if I'd made different choices." "Do you regret taking over the company?" "No." His answer was immediate and firm. "But I do regret how consumed I've let myself become by it. My father was right the other night. I worked too hard. I've forgotten how to exist outside of quarterly reports and board meetings and expansion plans." He squeezed her hand gently. "This, right now, is the first time in longer than I can remember that I'm not thinking about work at all. I'm just here with you, and it feels incredible." They talked until the restaurant began to empty, until Maria came by to tell them gently that they were closing, but take your time. No rush. They split a dessert, tiramisu that melted on Natalie's tongue, and Sebastian told her stories about his childhood in Queens, about working in his father's factory during summers, learning to respect the work before he was ever allowed to manage it. When they finally left, the February air had turned bitter, and Sebastian immediately shrugged off his coat to drape it over Natalie's shoulders. She protested, but he waved her off. "I run warm. Besides, I can't have you freezing on our first date." "Our first date," she repeated, liking how that sounded. "Does that mean you're planning a second? I'm planning a second, third, and fourth if you'll have me." He hailed a cab, then turned to her, his hands coming to rest on her waist. "Is that presumptuous? Maybe, but I like it." She looked up at him, at the way the streetlight caught in his eyes, at the nervous hope in his expression. "I'd like that very much." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, his lips warm against hers despite the cold. It was a perfect first kiss, gentle and questioning, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. The cab ride back to her apartment was quiet, comfortable, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and she felt safe in a way she hadn't expected to feel with someone so new. At her door, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and she felt herself melting into him, into the moment, into the possibility of whatever this was becoming. "When can I see you again?" he asked, his forehead resting against hers. "Soon. Tomorrow. I have a board meeting that will probably run until evening, but after, I could bring dinner to your place, something casual." "That sounds perfect." She watched from her window as his cab pulled away, her fingers touching her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. This was crazy, moving this fast with someone she'd just met. But it felt right in a way that defied logic. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Sebastian. Already miss you. Tomorrow can't come soon enough." She fell asleep smiling, still wearing his coat. The next 3 weeks unfolded like a dream Natalie was afraid to wake from. Sebastian made time for her in ways that seemed impossible for someone with his schedule. They had dinner together most evenings, sometimes at restaurants, often at her apartment or his penthouse in Tribeca. They talked about everything, discovering shared interests in old movies and hiking and terrible puns that made them both laugh until their sides hurt. He took her to the botanical garden on a Sunday morning, and they walked through the winter greenhouse, surrounded by tropical plants while snow fell outside. He told her about his plans to expand Ashford Industries' sustainability initiatives, to create manufacturing processes that could be models for the entire industry. She photographed him among the orchids, caught the way sunlight filtered through the glass and lit up his face, and later that image became her phone's lock screen. She took him to a photography exhibit in Chelsea, amateur work by teenagers from underserved neighborhoods, and watched his face as he studied each image with serious attention. He bought 3 prints, then quietly wrote a check to the program that had made the exhibit possible. He didn't make a show of it, didn't want recognition, just did it because it mattered. They were falling in love, fast and hard and completely. Natalie could feel it happening, like standing at the edge of a cliff and choosing to jump, knowing the landing might hurt but unable to stop herself anyway. Every smile he gave her, every casual touch, every text message made her heart expand until she thought it might burst. But the shadow of the annual report photo hung over everything. She kept meaning to tell him, to explain the impossible situation, but the right moment never seemed to arrive. How did you tell someone you were falling for that? You'd mysteriously appeared in his company's photographs, doing a job you'd never held. It sounded insane. She started having vivid dreams about the Brooklyn facility. In them, she walked through endless warehouses, touching materials she'd never worked with, surrounded by people she'd never met who all greeted her by name. The dreams felt real, visceral, and she'd wake up confused, needing several seconds to remember that she'd never been there, that the memories weren't hers. 3 weeks after their first date, Sebastian invited her to his parents' house for Sunday dinner. It felt significant, meeting his family, and Natalie spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing an outfit that said, "I'm serious about your son, but also I'm not trying too hard." Richard and Margaret Ashford lived in a comfortable house in Westchester, the kind of place that felt like home the moment you walked in. Margaret greeted Natalie with a warm hug, as if they'd known each other for years. "We're so glad to finally meet you. Sebastian hasn't stopped talking about you." Margaret was petite, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready." The house smelled like roasted chicken and fresh bread. Family photos covered the walls, and Natalie found herself drawn to them. Young Sebastian in various stages of growing up, gap-toothed and grinning, awkward in his teens, proud in his college graduation robe. There was love in every frame, a family that genuinely enjoyed each other. Dinner was relaxed and full of laughter. Richard told stories about the early,